I probably would have tried to hold the Cho pair instead of the Kha'Zix pair,
Uh-huh.
just based off of the items.
Okay, makes
If
sense.
you're leaning more towards the AP line, Mythic side, you're likely to win streak if you take that.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah,
None of these are really good with my items and setup, right?
yeah. I think they all kind of are bad, and the augments are bad in general.
Yeah. So from here, Caretaker's Chosen seems like the strongest.
Yeah. I think Caretakers is the best. There's like some arguments to be had for the potential to take Dryad Crown, but that's only if you already had a Kindred, because then you can get 4 Dryad in like very easily.
And then
In
you're
general, I
thinking
think,
Gnar
yeah,
Kindred reroll.
yeah, probably. But that's again only if you have what's there already. Trying to hard force into reroll is always very inconsistent right now, I think.
Hmm.
So if you have the setup to play the early game, I think it's actually like fairly strong. But if you don't have the setup, then hard forcing is probably not the way to go. So yeah,
Okay.
caretakers is probably just in general the best option here.
So like I oftentimes will just look at this 4.9, and this is where I get use stats as a crutch and kind of ignore
Hmm.
that potential. So it's really recognizing like it's like okay, even though the stats kind of say Gnar Kindred reroll is not that strong, it's like if you can tempo off of it and streak and get those Dryad stacks going, like that would make this average go significantly down if you could just filter for those games.
Yeah, definitely. Like, some of these crowns, like, they might not have the best stats, but let's say I had, like, either the Kindred, so I can guarantee 4 Dryad immediately, or I had something like a Gnar pair, right? I already have a Gnar pair. Or, like, if I have Janna pair and it offers me the Dragon Lord emblem,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's still probably good to take it, even if the stats don't say it does that well, just because you know that that's going to guarantee you the early game. If it's not going to guarantee you the early game, probably not worth it, right?
So
That's
another way
yeah,
to look at it is like if the augment helps you streak stage two, like the amount of tempo and gold you get from that could just be worth it, even if the stats kind of say that augment sucks.
yeah, exactly. Obviously, there are some augments where they're so bad that it probably won't happen. What I'm thinking probably is like built different. I think is like really bad. So no matter what you do, even
So
if you
like
like
even if
win a
you have a
little bit,
bunch
it's
of
like
2-star one costs that would work right
yeah.
away, it's like still not worth taking.
Yes, that's probably still not worth taking in the long run. There are just too many late game comps that just beat build different, I think.
Hmm.
Just because the numbers on that augment are just too like way too low. But things like, Dryad Crown, things like I'm trying to think about what else there might be that if I have like Ghostly for example, right, and I have Shen pair or something and it gives me a Shen. If I
Hmm.
can get Shen 2, that's pretty decent, right? Obviously, if I don't have any of those units, it's probably not worth it to take the augment, right?
Right.
Um,
So it kind of requires a strong early game stage two. Like hopefully it can help you five streak with high probability, and
mhm.
whatever that augment strength is in the late game can at least probably help you not get demolished in stage 4 and 5.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, right, like I think Nar is performing pretty poorly right now, but it's still it's still playable if you get it early on, like online early. Like I've won games on the current patch just playing Nar reroll with, for example, caretakers, right? So if you can get to like the silver caretakers that just drops you Nars, right, or whatever 2 cost it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get to a specific point, then it's not going to be bad. It's just that you have to recognize, because right now, if I try to hard force some kind of comp, if it's not a 4 cost comp, if it's a reroll comp, I'm actually like not very likely to hit, right?
Right.
But if I already have 2 of those units or three, 4 of those units, it's your EV is actually quite high,
When you play
right?
Gnar reroll, are you leaning more towards the ghostly variant or the faded dryad variant?
I tend to go more towards the ghostly variant specifically for reroll. It does, like, the thing about faded, right? A lot of the faded sort of the way that board works is trying to boost damage for, you know You're trying to boost damage for Syndra, right? But it doesn't really enable Gnar in any way.
Mhm.
And if I'm carrying Gnar, right, I want the board to maximize his DPS while making sure that, he has solid protection, right? So Faded, one, re-rolling the Faded units are a lot higher cost than Ghostly. The second thing is, if I want to play the Faded board and I want to have Warden, I'm going to probably need a set,
Right.
or else I have to play some hybrid board with Alawi plus maybe like two Ghostly. But the reason why Ghostly works well is because you can fit all of, like, there's a whole, every single defensive synergy in the Dryad line, there's a counterpart on the Ghostly line, right? And for Kindred, you can also get you can get the Reaper with
Hmm.
Kane, right? So it's actually like a very nice way to build out your synergies, and it's very easy. I think the Faded one, it doesn't enable Gnar carry enough to sort of justify it if you're playing it with reroll.
Okay. What
Yeah.
if you're not able to hit any of the ghostly two costs as 3 stars?
Hmm.
Would that same logic apply, or would there be a scenario
I
where?
think I think most of the time I actually don't even hit the ghostly 3 stars.
Mm,
But yeah, the same logic still applies, right? Because for ghostly, it's not about the units themselves. It's about what they provide to you, which is like your single target DPS goes up a lot, like a lot, right? If you
right.
can get the ghost stacked, and that's sort of what both Kindred and Gnar really want, is that they can get a huge amount of single target DPS and just start to delete units.
Hmm. Which is actually quite strong, in especially if you're on a gold augment start with
Mm-hmm.
Kobuko or Garen, right?
Or
It's like
Garen, yeah,
ghostly
yeah,
works really well into them.
yes, yeah, it is quite strong. And the nice part about, you know, I mean, obviously, you're probably not going to aim to play reroll Gnar most games, but it is
Mhm.
actually pretty decent in those matchups, right? Like straight up melee Gnar versus Kobuko or Garen, they're gonna take several ults to kill you, right? And if you have
Mm.
like the Morello on the Kindred, you can potentially get through them before they can scale up and kill the rest of your team because it's everything is so tanky, right? And your main carry is a melee unit. It's going to take them a lot longer to get through that than potentially like a very squishy backline.
Okay.
Yeah, but just something to think about. Obviously, I don't think it's applicable in this game, but sometimes it works.
Would you level here?
I wouldn't level just because I don't think playing the Nico is that important. So, what you have available to you, if you level here, you're still probably not going to streak because I don't have, you don't have the upgrades, right?
Hmm.
The caretakers comes online later, especially 8, right, when you can guarantee the radiant item. But
Yeah.
before then, you don't have to rush it, right? Because
Okay.
it's not like you can really win streak in this spot, especially in a prismatic lobby.
Yeah.
So it's probably better to just, don't level, keep your econ, potentially hit this Darius pair, which is very, that would sort of really stabilize you, right? Then you can keep your econ, and then you'll be in a good spot.
Okay. So from here, I'm basically like, at least with the units I have, hoping for an Alloon to pop up sometime. Otherwise,
Yeah, that's
could
fine.
transition into like Lilia Morgana as like a.
Yeah. That's definitely. I think that's good. One thing that I will say is, so you go for the adaptive immediately.
Mhm.
If you slam the adaptive immediately, you're kind of losing out on some potential to play around the Darius too. If you save the cloak and you potentially get a sword, you can actually, instead of going for a loon, if you don't hit the loon, right? And I greed my items a bit more. If I hit Darius 2 before a loon, I'd probably take the Darius 2, try to get a BT off carousel instead.
Yeah.
And that will actually help a lot in terms of early game win streak afterwards, right? Because
Uh
BT Darius is
huh.
actually like Darius without sustain, not that great, right?
Right.
He's gonna die over the course of the fight. If you can get sustain on him and he's upgraded, plus you have sort of the building blocks of the Emerald board, is actually quite good.
Okay.
But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Obviously, like you hit the loon here, so that's great. You have like something very solid to play around. But that's the thing.
So
Like in the early game, you don't have to be that hasty about your item slams, right?
right.
Especially if you're not yet at a point where you think you can win streak multiple rounds.
Right. So for this augment, you by default kind of just assume you're lose streaking.
Yeah, yeah. Because other people might take early game prismatic augments. You don't have all of your resources from this augment until you hit 8 yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously winning rounds is nice, but it's not like you can really hard force a win streak without like significant investment.
Right.
So if that's the case, you can really, obviously a lot of the times we'll try to want to be high tempo, high strength, but sometimes it actually takes the discipline to be like, I can actually greed here. I should probably be greeting, keep my econ up, and keep my sort of item slams a bit wider so that you can play around it a bit easier, right?
Mm-hmm. So these items are kind of awkward since now I don't have any tank items.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It
given
is
that I
it is a
have
little bit awkward.
the Elune pair, I'm like basically with higher probability now leaning down the umbral path, which means I'm kind of
Yeah.
thinking I want to make Silas items. I
Silas items are good.
wonder if I should
Like
make Gunblade
obviously,
then there and try to keep Shiv open.
yeah, you do need some kind of shred here. Because if you go for the spark, well, yeah, it's Gunblade Spark would be fine, or
Spark.
something.
Well, I guess Spark would be better on like
Uh,
what you call it right now on my front line.
yeah.
Okay, so not Behemoth Crown. Radiant
Yeah, probably
Refactor
not Behemoth.
seems okay. Not great because I need frontline.
Yeah. I mean, the nice part about Radiant Refractor is you could get a
Oh,
Radiant Spark or a Radiant Morello's,
right.
which I think
Although
are
I
like,
already have a Morello built.
yeah. I'm
Oh,
saying
the
you
upgrade
can
can be the
change that, right?
Morello.
You can
Oh
upgrade that
yeah.
into
Hmm.
Radiant Morello or a Radiant Spark. I don't know which one of those is currently better than the data. Let me just double check. It's sparked by 0.05 placements.
Okay,
But
and
like
both of
in
them are
general, I
really
think,
good, right?
yeah, both of those items are very, very good. I think that just having a general idea of what Radiant items are really strong, and especially thinking about the comp that you're currently playing, right? If I'm playing Umbral, both Radiant Spark and Radiant Morello are very, very strong, right? So obviously you already have the Morello slammed, and you could potentially get the cloak. So not only would you have either Radiant Spark or Radiant Morello, you would also be able to build the counterpart, right? If I can get the Spark here, then I'll have my Shred already, good to go. So that's why I think, here, obviously I think Radiant Refractor stats are kind of fake in a sense because, there are a lot of people building suboptimal Radiant items.
Hmm.
But if you know what the good Radiant items are, like, you're essentially just building Radiant Spark, right, or Radiant Morello, which
Right.
is very, very good.
Okay. So then this would be the strongest over Lucky Gloves.
Yeah. I think obviously Lucky Gloves is very good,
Yeah.
um, but Lucky Gloves to really get value, I generally like to take Lucky Gloves if I either already have a TG slammed
Hmm.
or if I have a glove on bench, because then you can get the 2 value, right?
Right.
Then it's very, very strong.
Oh,
Otherwise, I could take the 3 gloves. I still have to build out the rest of my items, and I might not even get a glove off of carousel, in which case it's not the greatest, right?
hmm. So here I'm leaning Radiant Relics, although I could
Mm-hmm.
see an argument for Prismatic Ticket, like just go for the Loon 3.
Yeah, that's true. You can go for the Alloon 3. Both are very good. You can probably commit to one or the other. If you
Mhm.
do go for Prismatic Ticket, you'd probably want to roll a bit on the current level just to make sure that you're somewhat stable.
Yeah.
If you're committing to playing reroll, then you do want to make sure that your mid game is strong, right? So 2 potential options there.
Hmm. The main argument for making sure mid game strong is because you know you're going to fall off late game.
Yeah. Like if you don't get Silas 2, right, then you're definitely going to fall off. If you have Silas 2, this is why like I think Umbral, I generally tend to play more towards going level 8 just so that I can guarantee like the higher cost units a bit more.
Right.
Obviously it's not going to be easy to hit the 3-star 3 cost after doing that, but if you can hit the 2-star Silas, I think it's a bit more consistent.
Yeah. The other thing is because I have Caretaker's Chosen, I want to go level 8, which doesn't
Yeah,
work
yeah,
well with
yeah,
the
yeah,
Prismatic Ticket.
definitely.
Okay. So out of these, Dragon's Will seems like it makes the most sense. I guess you could argue for Glamorous Gauntlet for Silas, but I just need Frontline right now.
Yeah. It's one what you can build right now, right? So obviously, Dragon's Will is applicable to the board currently, versus Glamorous Gauntlet, which will take a while before you really get value out of that because you really want that on a Silas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the main thing. But yeah, you can kind of see here, right? Like if you take the Radiant Refractor or whatever it was, right? I think you actually do a little bit better than this current spot.
Yeah.
Um, even
Yeah.
even if the stats are saying it's one way, um, I do think Radiant Refractor is better here.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking like, oh, Radiant Refractor seems like you go down an item, but it's actually you're down only half a component, right?
Yeah,
And
you're
then
down half a component, but you can guarantee which one you get. Right,
right,
that's
you
sort of
just
the
get a
big
lot
thing.
more optionality. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if I didn't have Rod on bench, though, I mean, I
Yeah,
guess
if you
it's
didn't have Rod on bench, it's less like it's not as good. But the fact that you already have the Morello slammed and that you can
right.
guarantee Radiant Morello, even if you don't get Spark off of the component anvil, is already like that's already a huge plus for it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you don't have Morello, if you don't really have any items that you think you can make that you want to make a Radiant, then obviously that augment is going to be bad, right? But if you have something that you can do something with already, then it's already it's pretty high value because you'd be like, okay, this is the Radiant that I want and I can make it, and it's going to be good because it's on a unit that I know will apply it very well, right?
Right. So let's say I didn't have the Rod on bench, or let's say I picked the Radiant Refactor and I didn't get a cloak. Would you
Mhm.
greed the Radiant Spark off of Carousel, since I probably have good
Yeah,
like
you
first or
can
second pick,
also
or
yeah, you
would
can
you just
definitely greed
slam
it off of
the Radiant
Carousel.
Morello?
I mean, the thing is, Radiant Morello is also a very good item.
Mhm.
But I mean, at this point, if you really want frontline, then you can greet it, right? You can just say, okay, I'm not gonna win, so maybe I'll just greed for Radiant Spark. And the nice part about this is being able to guarantee two Radiant items on a single unit. That's always like very, very strong. So if you do go for the Radiant Spark and
Oh
you say
yeah,
like, I'm gonna play Silas here. If I have Silas Radiant Spark, I go level 8. I get like something like a Radiant Crown Guard or something, right? I honestly think that's probably, even with a 1-star silence, that's probably a top 3, right?
hmm
Yeah,
I
so
forgot about that.
there is
Yeah.
merit. There's definitely merit in greeting here, for
Okay.
sure.
So what's your thought on putting that on the Malphite? Because I was thinking later I want to. Oh, but I have item remover, so.
Yeah, you have item. So the thing about this augment is it gives you the item remover, so you can always
Mhm.
just put it on Yorick, and you won't be missing out on any type of value.
Okay.
Um,
So I
and
think I want to
obviously, I
put that
think
on Silas later, but yeah.
mhm.
Okay. Yeah, just all these small optimizations.
Yeah. I just like, I think, yeah, it's just like the minor things. I think, but that's really what makes a lot of the differences in like these high level games, right? It's just making
Yep.
sure that you have the optimizations there. But I think right now you're in a pretty good spot. Econ is a little bit low, but that's because
hmm
your board is worth a lot of money. But this is in general where I would start thinking about how I can make my econ back if I'm playing for level 8, right? So like look at your current bench. What can you do, right? You can Soraka pair, not that important, right? So last round you could have sold Soraka, sold the York, and sold one Darius
hmm
to make 40 instead. Because like that's where these units, even if I hit them upgraded, they're not going to do much, right? So in those instances, you have to be making your econ breakpoints if you're thinking, okay, I'm playing for level 8. I need the money so that I can roll for Silas, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what you're playing for, right?
Okay. I was surprised that this
Interesting.
duelist just seems so strong. I was
Yeah,
like,
duelists are very. I mean, especially into your current board because you don't have a single target to
yeah,
deal with them that well. Yeah, I think this board really can only deal with duelists if you have Silas online.
hmm
Otherwise, there's no way any other form of Umbral board can beat them. Even if you have something like Yone 2 doesn't even do much into duelists because of the way that his targeting works. He's not going to hit their main carries before they start hitting your back line. Yeah, it's just like a Duelist is a very bad matchup for a lot of comps. I think, like especially the ones that rely on like a backline AP DPS.
I was just also surprised like how I got stomped on this. I guess it's a Orn 2.
Yeah, Orn 2 is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. Which goes back to what we talked about before the game around if they have a super tank and you're stuck on it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. So out of these, I guess I could do pick up the litter to try to get a loon, but that's like seems very high variance and probably low EV. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. If you miss, you're kind of screwed.
yeah,
I
and
think
then neither of the other
honestly,
ones.
Triforce is probably the best option just because you're probably carrying a loon. But I would
Hmm.
definitely re-roll the other two just to see if you can't get anything better.
Yeah,
Keepers might be okay, but Keepers is a little bit difficult to get full value of in Umbral.
yeah. Because do you know the order of operations? I assume it like enemies knock down the keeper's shield first, because otherwise the 8-second shield is lost.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's they knock down the 8 second shield first,
Okay.
but even like just positioning wise, right? Like your units are until you can get 6 Umbral, your units aren't even getting max value keeper
Yeah.
shields, right?
So then unified seems like it synergizes well with the umbral shield.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Unified is definitely pretty good with Umbral. And here you can definitely start like you can even unify the back line because these units getting Umbral value is not that important yet. That's
Mhm.
good.
I assume the umbral shield is more valuable for this Darius than like putting it frontline and getting the unified value. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely more value, I think. Especially if it's like just Darius one, you kind of just like I think it's more effective health
Hmm.
uh, with the shield versus resistances on a unit that's going to die anyways. Okay.
So here, I assume it's either Archangel or Redemption.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the other three. Yeah, it's difficult to say which one is better here. So the thing about this is the awkward part about redemption on this comp is that it's very difficult to get a lot of redemption value on the front line because
Because they're
Silas is
just
moving around
shielding.
so much.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Like one Silas is moving around a bunch. You're essentially going to be getting it on like behemoths, and if I get like a different melee carry, they might also be getting redemption value. I think, yeah, if you take archangels here, it's probably worth it to potentially pop off the Nashers, or so you have archangels, Morello, and an adaptive on the
Hmm.
Loon, and then you can do some kind of backline with Lilia, right? You can do like essentially Lilia's holding these other items as your secondary carry, which is pretty solid, right?
I probably should have put
So
the
this is good.
Dragon's Claw on Silas. I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
thinking
it's
if the orange stays alive longer, then he could just give me more items, but
mhm.
probably better on the Silas.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is slightly better on Silas. It's just because like you probably want your radiant item on the primary carry, or like one of the carries,
Hmm.
especially if it's not Orn two. I think
Right.
that it's less important. Like obviously, if it is Orn two, then you probably do want to have it on the Orn. But until then, not that big of a deal. I think honestly, I would probably just move these items onto the Lilia. Like Lilia one is probably better than Janet two in this
Oh,
context,
okay.
just in general.
That's
Yeah,
that was like our conversation on Monday. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think Lilia just as a standalone unit, like as a AP damage dealer, is very strong right now
Hmm.
compared to. I mean, like Janet. Janna is not actually going to be doing too much because I don't think her shielding value is actually too high on this type of board. And she
Oh,
also
yeah.
doesn't do that much damage, right? So
Hmm.
that's the big thing.
So here the encounter was rerolls are one, so I'm thinking to go
Hmm.
for Yorick and Loon 3.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will say I think one thing is at a certain point you might have wanted to sell off the Yorks even earlier before this encounter hit just to make econ because it's like
Uh-huh.
still not that important to have the Yorick three. Especially if he's currently not holding your items and he's not any sort of carry capacity, those
Mhm.
should be the units that you think, okay, I have to sell these off if I want to make econ. It's like it's more important that I have the goal to hit the primary carries that have my items than it is to hold a unit that currently does not have anything, right?
Right.
Okay.
Is it worth holding the Lilia pair there, or just make econ?
I think it's only worth holding Lilia pair if you one scout and see that nobody's playing Lilia,
Mm-hmm.
and two, well, actually, I don't think there's any situation where it's worth it to hold the Lilia pair on level 8. If you're already win streaking, then maybe. If you know that you're winning already, you can hold it because you know you can go 9 and eventually hit the 3-star.
Yeah.
If you're not winning and you don't think your board is that strong yet, then there's not too much of a reason to do it.
Okay.
It just costs a bit too much gold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like you end up selling off the York here, right? But think of it, you would have had a lot more extra gold to work with, at least like 3 extra rolls, right? If you had sold them off earlier to make interest.
Right.
So just something to keep in mind.
I'm thinking set item or TG.
Yeah, set item or TG is good. Yeah, I think in general
Oh no,
TG
I
is
was thinking
probably.
Orn. Okay.
Oh, I mean, honestly, Orn 2, taking the Orn 2 is actually pretty good here because you can still use D-Blade. D-Claw is like, it's kind of lost value. I think like the more MR you get, it's like diminishing returns, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah, I think I guess the biggest problem here is like a lot of your front line isn't upgraded, right? You don't really have the Silas
Yeah.
or the Orn, so you just end up dying, right? So like
Yep.
that's I think the biggest thing is you have to be planning your econ towards what is going to spike your board. So here, I mean, a Loon 3 is good, right? And I think that's probably what your win condition is. But like your top 4 condition here is really hitting your upgraded front line, which is the Silas
Right.
and the Orn. Where your items are is where you should be prioritizing your sort of resources.
Mm.
So if I want to hit the Silas, I'm probably going to have to give up on things that are going to be costing me money. That one instance where you're holding the Lilia pair, the one instance where you're holding too many Yoriks, right? Because honestly, at the end of the day, Silas is probably always going to be a better user of these items than Yorick is, unless you have the hero augment, right?
Right.
And so if that's the case, that's what you want to be gearing your econ towards, is to hit that particular unit, so that once you do, you're going to be at a stable point. So that's sort of what I would recommend. And again, like the minor optimizations there, like you could have like 3 radiant item Silas here right now, right? That's or the double radiant
2.
item, or
Yeah.
whatever, 2 radiant item Silas, right? In which case, even a Silas 1 might already be stable, right? With radiant
Right.
spark and something else. Even if he had like radiant spark, if he had like radiant spark, radiant arc plus the crown guard as one possibility, that would be a unit that you could potentially not have to roll beyond Silas 1 and probably already be in a good spot, right?
Okay, so
So
anytime
just
I
things like
see
that,
that I
yeah.
could get 2 radiants, I should already be thinking about what forecast I could put that on, since that would pretty much a 1-star of that copy. A strong 1-star forecast should be able to be stable on stage
Yeah,
4,
yeah.
especially.
It should be stable, and yeah, and especially in this case, right? Like it's very easy to start leaning in that direction because you already had the Alloons, right?
Mhm.
So you're already thinking about playing Umbral. Obviously, if I'm playing Umbral, the 2 main units that are on my mind are Silas and Alloon, right? Those are the 2 main ones that I'm thinking of.
Right.
So Radiant Morello is already very good, and I want Radiant Spark, right? Or some form of Spark. Those are like 2 of the best Radiant items in the game. If I can guarantee those, I'm in a very good spot, right?
Mhm.
And I think like at the end of the day, like Declaw is fine, but it actually didn't end up giving you that much value on the end game board, right?
Right.
So I
So,
think in general, yeah, there's like situations where it's good and it's bad to take either or of those 2 radiant augments.
mhm. So big picture takeaways from this game. don't hold units on bench that aren't really contributing to how my board is itemized. Early game, I should be, especially with an augment that favors late game, I should really be focused on econ over like an early level and trying to contest
Hmm.
for board strength.
Yeah.
And then just thinking more critically about augment selection and who I'm itemizing, and really planning out who my late game carries are in advance, especially with the augment and item potential that's coming down the
Yeah.
line.
Yeah. That's
Any
the big thing.
other big takeaways that you see?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think that, yeah, just like, I mean, this is mostly just a meta thing, but in general, it's applicable towards whatever the game state is. Your decisions in the early game, essentially, they have to reflect what's currently strong in the meta, right? And in a sense. So you can afford to not push levels. You can afford to greed your econ a bit more. One, because you don't actually take that much damage in the early game, right? But two, a lot of people, and most likely in most instances, you as well will be playing for something like a 4 cost, right? If that's the case, then whatever you do, you have to be thinking about how that will affect how easy it is to hit those 4 costs later down the line, right?
Right.
That's that's the biggest thing is, I think win streaking is good. That's not to say that win streaking is not good. All right, don't let the idea of I had to play for a 4 cost prevent you from playing a strong early game. But sometimes you you just can't do that, right? You're not going to have the shops. You might not have the items yet to really hard force a win streak. When that happens, you just have to kind of accept it, right? And then you just be like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. What am I really playing for, right? What am I trying to do? I'm trying to stabilize at the most important stage of the game. Sometimes that's 3-2. Now it's not really 3-2. So now you're thinking about 4-2, 4-1, right? And how am
Mm.
I going to get the resources to hit? Will I have the econ to hit? Will I have the proper items for whatever units I'm going for in those instances? And that's just the main thing.
Okay.
It's just being like, it's sometimes you have to rethink certain habits and just like be very deliberate in like a lot of these instances. Like the early game is most important because it's how you can really manage your econ, right? It's like the snowball effect.
Mhm.
So just making sure that your decisions are deliberate versus autopilot, I think is like that's the biggest thing you can get out of the early game and be like, if I do this particular action, does it make sense? What am I doing it for? Right? If it's just because you're pushing levels just for the sake of pushing levels, then you can then you have to reevaluate, right? Then you have to be like, okay, but what if I didn't push the level? Does it make more sense for me not to spend the econ here, right? What am I getting out of leveling? What am I doing holding these pairs, right? What do they offer me? If they don't offer me something that's enough, then you just let them go. You make the econ and you sort of go from there, right?